to the SLS series. My name is Ifemade. Today I'll be speaking to Mr. Otome Oyo on his journey through sustainability. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube page and enjoy every minute and every second of the conversation. Do have a great day.
Yeah, thanks to my white beard, I can't lie to anybody's face about my age. So I come from the generation where you were one of four things. You were either a lawyer, an accountant, a doctor, an engineer, or a disgrace to your family. My parents probably thought that I would be a doctor, but I wasn't going to take responsibility for someone's life. I didn't think I had it in me, so I decided to become an engineer. Mechanical engineering was fun. University of Ibadan. Graduated in the very early 2000s, 2001 to be exact. And after a stint at the Lagos State Ministry of Works, I had a fortuitous meeting with a gentleman who had just started out as the safety manager, or what we used to call SHE, so Safety, Health and Environment Manager at what was then Econet Wireless, today Airtel. And I made my pitch to him. Probably was one of my very first pitches that actually got me something. So I made my pitch and I said, listen, I have a degree in mechanical engineering and I'm looking for a job. And the guy says, do you know anything about safety management? I said, no. I said, but by the next time you see me, I will. And I spent the entire weekend at a cyber cafe. No broadband back then, at a cyber cafe, reading up on everything I knew about safety management. I remember the interview vividly, answered every question like I was born to do it. And then as he saw me to the elevator, he said, you are one hell of a bullshit artist, but I like you. And that was how I got hired. I wanted to move on to proper engineering, what I call proper engineering, and I applied to Nestle. Final interview for an engineering role at Nestle, somebody says, you know, you look like a commercial guy. And they asked me a few commercial questions. And then next thing I knew, I was a brand manager managing the Milo brand. I think what probably gave me an edge was that I grew up the son of an advertising professional and a journalist, so I could speak intelligently about the subject, and so hence started my marketing career at Nestle. 3 years in, I felt I didn't have the kind of deep knowledge. Again, coming from an engineering background, if you don't have first principles, there's nothing to fall back on when things go wrong. So, you know, as they say, I was running on vibes. So I decided, get an MBA, applied, did everything that I needed to do. I remember it was either City University, London, or Imperial College. And if I couldn't go to Imperial College for engineering, at least I could go and do an MBA at Imperial College. And I remember when I was asked to do what was then TOEFL, I said to myself, that's not going to happen because I've spoken English all my life. My parents were BBC-trained broadcasters, so I said to myself, no. So I had a conversation with the admissions director, my interview with the admissions director. So at the end of the interview, I said, in my best Channel 5 British accent, I understand that I'm supposed to be taking an English exam. He said, I don't think that's going to be necessary. And that's how I got into doing the MBA. So finished the MBA, came back, itchy feet, joined the Sahara Group, which was then probably the fastest growing oil and gas concern in Nigeria, most popular. People had a term for people who worked at Sahara then, Sahara Big Boy, back in the day. And I spent a year there, but I think marketing called to me. So I moved on to several different careers, several different organizations, Tetra Pak, the Coca-Cola Company, Guinness Nigeria, Diageo, and then so on and so forth. So it's been a very interesting career building brands, developing marketing strategy, doing some really, really exciting things. Sometimes when I walk into a room, these days when I'm teaching, people ask, when somebody has introduced me or asked me to introduce myself, I say, I have worked for pretty much every brand, worked for or on every brand in Nigeria or its major competitor. And I think I get a kick out of the fact that people actually test me. So pretty much every brand in Nigeria. So it's been a fun ride so far. So I had a marketing director once who I reported to. He was Spanish, lived in Amsterdam. And he took a trip from South Africa. So he came to Nigeria, then went on to South Africa because he covered Africa, Middle East, and the Caribbean. And so he flew to South Africa and then had to fly back to Amsterdam. And he said, dude, we were in the air for 10 hours and we're still on the African continent. I said, yes. I think, so that gave me sort of a view of how underrepresented Africa is on the global stage. I remember when I was doing my MBA, we were looking, so I was doing my MBA, I remember that during my MBA was when the first iPhone was launched. So that's sort of how far back it was, about 17, 18 years ago. And I remember back then that there were no global Fortune 500 companies situated on the African continent, despite the size, the resource, the people, and the money that existed on the African continent. Today, we're telling stories about Dangote, we're telling stories about Mo Ibrahim, we're telling stories about Bua. Back then, it wasn't a thing. And so stepping into a boardroom, making a presentation about an annual plan, or making a presentation to a global team about an annual plan about Africa, it wasn't as easy as it is today. I mean, I remember watching, I don't know, it was one of these pitch programs, and this lady was reading out statistics about the African continent. And I'm like, those statistics always existed. I think what has happened is that over the years, people have come to understand more about Africa. People have visited more. I remember one of our directors said he'd never met a bunch of people where everyone wanted and believed they could become a millionaire. And in actual fact, Africa is one of the, maybe outside America and maybe the larger populations like India and China, becoming a millionaire on the African continent isn't difficult, but you have to bring a totally different mindset to it. The diversity in Africa is so significant that even within Nigeria is not even, in most boardrooms now, Nigeria is not considered one country. It is considered at least 3, in some cases 6, because I come from the Niger Delta, at least partially. And I can tell you for free that the language changes every 50 kilometers, at least dialect-wise. And the behavior, the attitude changes the same way on the African continent. If you think about diversity on the African continent, Africa has every possible DNA strain of human existence. And so in that, you can find out that even the markets differ. The way in which you access those markets is different. Forget the stories about, corruption and this and that. Everywhere has it. I think just fundamentally understanding that the way you talk to a Somali is totally different from the way you talk to a Kenyan. Totally different. If you ask directions from a Tanzanian, be ready to have a conversation. If you ask directions from a Kenyan, depending on where they are from, they will tell you where to go, but it's going to take longer than a Nigerian, right? And if you order food in Ghana, be ready to wait an hour, not because it's bad service, but it's just cultural. So Africa is very different as you move from west to east, north to south, right? And so understanding those brands and understanding how those brands speak to people in those different countries. Let me give you an example. There was a Coca-Cola campaign that aired in Kenya, and it had this very large man saying the word brrr. And it was an Africa-wide campaign. Didn't work in Nigeria. Did not work at all. There was a global campaign with Coca-Cola, and it's one of the largest brands I've worked for. There was a global campaign for Share a Coke, you know, the one with the names on the cans. And the same advert was used in every country except Nigeria, because the advert showed a dog looking for its name. And when it was shown in Nigeria, the first thing somebody said was, bingo. Right? So it was like, it didn't resonate. So you must, of essence, understand each market on the African continent for you to thrive significantly. Brands like Jameson fully understand that level of diversity. When Jameson came into this market, it was way behind everyone. Right? At that time, I was working for Diageo, so I had a front row seat into the Jameson story. And Jameson came into Nigeria and was looking for an inroad and decided, you know what, there's this group of people they call Alte, sort of who lived an alternative lifestyle, a less, what's the word, a less stuck-up lifestyle, a less, as they use the word today, less tease. It was more about being practical. And basically, what we didn't realize in Diageo was that Jameson was taking over a space that we owned at the time with a brand called Smirnoff. Because Smirnoff was essentially the party starter. And then Jameson came in and became the party starter. Now Jameson is probably the fastest growing whiskey in the West African sub-region. Nigeria is totally killing it. And so you have to understand that level of diversity. However, on the flip side, we are all human. And so even when there is diversity, when you dig far enough, you find a human story for every single thing. Everyone's elder brother, at least the ones that are great, I'm sure there are horror stories out there, but for most people, an elder brother is the person who is cheeky to you at home, but nobody should touch you when you're out of the house. He's my brother. I can do that to him. You can't. You don't have the right to do that. I can bully him. It's fine. He's my brother. But if you try it, I'll stand up for him. You know, and those were some of the things that brands like Coca-Cola, brands like Milo, brands like Maggie understood about basic human truths. Everybody wants a hug when it's the holidays. Whether it is Christmas or Easter or whatever, whenever people are supposed to be with their families, everybody wants a hug. And that is, as Coca-Cola called it, the real magic of life. And Coca-Cola essentially inserted itself into those scenarios. So I've talked a lot about all of those brands, but the thing is, on one side, you have to understand the diversity. But in understanding that diversity, you understand that you have to dig a lot deeper to understand human beings and find a basic human truth. That basic human truth is how you connect with human beings every day.
First of all, I love the ESG part of it because I think people forget about the economics. When I worked at Tetra Pak, which is from a sustainability standpoint, is one of the in its founding, it was about sustainability, right? Paper packaging for perishable goods, aseptic paper packaging for perishable goods, and I had the opportunity to visit the sort of the production I visited the home of Tetra Pak, which was in Lund in Sweden, and then of course the engineering part of it, which is modern, in something that's called crash course. So when you work for Tetra Pak, you at some point in time go through what they call crash course. So they tell you the entire, and I watched, I visited Frövi, a town called Frövi, which is sort of where the Swedish expression of Tetra Pak gets its wood. And so we went into the forest and watched trees being felled. Now, interestingly, Sweden treats wood as its own oil. So for every tree that is felled, 5 are planted. And they actually track their requirements, their wood requirements, over the next 20 years. And whether they will have enough
for the next 20 years. If you know anything about Swedes and Nordics, they are very Spartan in the way in which they do things. But they showed us the graph, and they were well ahead of what their requirements were going to be. And so you watch that tree go from, and I think, for me, it was one of the seminal moments of my life where I thought, we are behind in this country. Literally, the logging company was run by 4 people, a mother and 3 siblings. And 2 of the siblings drove they're like tractors with saws. So literally this arm just comes up, literally like my hand, holds a tree, the bottom part of it slices the tree clean, it turns the tree on its side, zooms the tree through and back, and all the branches are gone, and then cuts it into specific sized logs into a truck. And that truck goes, and so we followed the truck all the way to the paper company. The interesting thing about that paper company is that apart from producing almost all the paper that Tetra Pak in Sweden requires, it also provides all the electricity for the town that it is based in. That electricity comes from the oil from the wood. So when you talk about sustainability, for me it's about how can this thing continue? How can we still be here in 20 years? Right? I love the whole tech boom that is going on in Nigeria, but I keep asking myself, we are not going to eat content. We are not going to wear payment systems. Somebody has to do something about the things that we need every day. And so, I understand that today ESG is sort of a promotional term and everybody talks about it as saying, oh yeah, this is something we're doing, they put it in annual report and all of that. But truly it's about how is this business going to be here 20 years from now? How is it possible that the son of one person, like in Guinness for instance, somebody's grandfather worked in the plant, the other person worked as a supervisor, the other person, the next generation, worked as the doctor in the clinic in Guinness. How does that happen? Everybody is not going to be a millionaire, but everybody wants to be comfortable. The reason why we all want to be rich is because we are in some ways running away from that bottom of the barrel. We're just trying to stay above. But ultimately for businesses, it's about how are you here 20 years from now. I did some work with a fitness brand, and one of the reasons why the fitness brand was born was because someone died from a preventable disease. And so how do we look at our health and look at the things that we consume? There's a whole industry now being built around holistic healing and holistic eating and all of those kinds of things. I think it's important, absolutely. I think as organizations, again, your human beings are a resource. How are we, while AI is growing and all of those kinds of things, how are we taking care of the people who build these things, right? And then safety, because I started my career in safety management, I think, so I was somewhere yesterday and we were supposed to be touring a factory. And someone says, everybody needs to sign these forms. And somebody says, well, I don't need to sign it, I've been here before. And there was an argument going back and forth, and I said, sorry, excuse me, who's the safety officer here? And the person raised their hand. I said, what did you say? We all have to sign the forms? And I looked at the individual, we all have to sign the forms. The reason is, safety is not something that you pay lip service to. As I famously said in a newsletter when I was at Econet Wireless, Moses built the ark before the storm. It's a totally different story, but it's Noah, obviously. But I literally wrote that in a newsletter that went to the entire organization. It was an error, do you understand? But it also gave me an opportunity to learn a very valuable lesson in leadership. But I'll tell that story later. But Noah built the ark before the storm. You don't talk about safety after something has happened. You don't talk about, you don't close the barn door after the horse is painted.
You don't talk about safety when somebody has stuck their hands in the machine without switching it off and then it cuts off their fingers. That's an insurance conversation. That's not safety. We shouldn't be. It's not what shall we do now. It's what should we have done before. So when we talk about ESG, I think while it's a great promotional, stake in the ground. I think as organizations, when we start with the economics of it, the rest of it becomes easy because the economics tells you these other things must happen so that the economics can continue. When I worked at Tetra Pak, we tried to get our customers who buy packaging from us to get into the whole ESG thing and post-use collection and all of that kind of stuff. And one of the things that we told our bosses back in Sweden was that Nigerians are only interested in sustainability if it is economically beneficial. Fast forward to that was what, 2009, 2010. Fast forward to now, you've got electricity distribution companies complaining that their biggest customers are reducing their consumption. Why? Everybody's going solar. Oh, suddenly sustainability is profitable. You've got a bank like Sterling Bank that is covered, their head office is covered in solar panels. They at peak, they generate somewhere in the region of 1 megawatt of electricity. Oh yeah, from that one building. And it's amazing. So if you look at Victoria Island, for instance, from a tall building, banks all have solar panels. Everybody's jumping on the ESG, quote unquote, bandwagon. Why? The economics work. So when we start with the economics, the rest is easy. Where I'm at now is, interesting. It was 2019. I just separated from Suntory. No, late 2018. So between 2018 and 2019, I just separated from Suntory, which eventually was sold off to a distribution company. And it wasn't a comfortable time. But I think in times of discomfort, perspective comes. And I decided to do something I learned from a movie. The movie is called Cocktails and Dreams, starring Tom Cruise. And he went to a business school. And the first thing they asked him to do was write their obituary. So I wrote my obituary. And one of the major thing in my obituary was that I was writing it in the third person, obviously, that he spent his life helping African institutions become multinational. So most of my career has been spent working for multinational organizations. And every time I walk into a new organization, either whether it's on contract or it's full-time, I always look for the multinational opportunity. Multinational organizations have built themselves or built the capability to expand into a market almost seamlessly and deliver the same value. Now, they can go in, they can come out, but the only reason why they can be that nimble, seemingly, is that they built the processes and systems that allow them to do those things. And so when you build the people, you build the processes, and then you back it up with systems, what happens is that you can go anywhere and you become infinitely adaptable to the environment. So if you're going to, like I said, if you're going to build a business, you need to understand the people. So if part of your system is walking into an environment and saying, okay, what happens here? How do people get around? How do people eat? What do they do? That is research. That is understanding the people. When you understand the people, then you can build a product or modify your product to say, you know what? This is what is going to fit these people, right? This is what is going to happen to these people. And this is how this product is going to affect or change their lives. And then once that happens, you follow the remaining P's. And so, for me, my pivot, as you call it, is moving into building those people, building those processes, and building those systems to make me infinitely, or make those companies infinitely uh, uh, flexible in the way in which they can enter markets and do things like that. So I want to see, I love the fact that we now have AFCFTA. I want to see railways across Africa. I want to see, petroleum pipelines running across the African continent so that, the African continent itself does not need to buy anything from anywhere. If you think about it, the clothing we wear on this continent is not made here. Even if it is made here, it is made by people who aren't technically from here. I want someone in Nairobi to be able to sell. I want Nigeria to stop importing milk from Europe and start importing it from Nairobi. Where at some point in time during the year, the streets of Nairobi, you can smell the milk in the gutters because there's a glut. But the reason why Nairobi can do that is because Nairobi is 5,900 feet up. And so the cows have a more comfortable time than they would have in Juleki, right? I want, cement made anywhere to move. I want us as a continent to begin to cooperate even more. And so positioning small businesses to be able to scale, not just via the, and I have a preference for or how do I put it? I have an affinity for people who make physical products, right? Digital products move easy. Physical products have a hard time, but we still need them. And so how do you build a system and a process to ensure that those products can move across a continent and we can pay each other and we can work with each other and we can build brands across the African continent so that someday we can actually have a Fortune 500 company sitting on the African continent. Mind if I tell a story? No. Okay. So I'm going back to the Moses build the app for the store. So I get this job. Remember the first job I got where I made my pitch? So my manager at the time, wonderful man called Oyo, had gone off on a training program. So I was supposed to write the newsletter. I was very enthusiastic, throwing out all my PowerPoint skills. And I, put together this newsletter. And in the center of the newsletter, it says, we need to prepare in advance. Remember, Moses built the ark before the storm. And package it, did it beautifully, and he had given me his email login so I could send to all staff. So I go into his email, write a beautiful email, send the newsletter to all staff. And I'm like, yeah, I'm done for the day. As I was trying to get something out of his drawer, an email flashed up, and it says, literally it says, Baba Debo, wow, which ark did Moses build? And I was mortified. So mortified that I broke the key in the lock. So I couldn't even get what I wanted out. And I was totally destroyed. And I was panicking the whole day. First job, oh my God, what's going on? And I think everybody has that. But I learned something that day about leadership and life. And I got the key out, got it fixed, came back, and then my boss comes back. I'm waiting for him. He comes back, and then he sees the email, and he's like, now, what then happens is that someone within the organization with whom he had a confrontation, one of the chiefs, wrote a very lengthy email talking about the fact that this was an example of why the safety department in this organization was totally ineffective, blah, 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 blah. Basically carpeted us. And my boss says, listen, I hope you know how to pray. By tomorrow morning, we will know whether this is going to take us both out or we are going to survive it. And I go home and I pray. Next morning, we come in and I'm bright and early, I'm sitting next to my boss. And he comes in, looks at me, laughs, sits down at his laptop. And there is a flood of emails, laughter, a lot of banter about how, we goofed and all that kind of stuff. And then he replies all and says, dear all, thank you very much for your colorful comments and emails. please note that it was an error of purpose just to make sure that you were good. And you know when stress melts away, and that day, several years later, I sort of learned to encapsulate it that in every situation, there is always an opportunity to turn things around. But it sort of leads into that quote that I gave earlier, which is you have to be willing to be wrong to be successful. You have to be willing to be wrong to be successful. If you insist on being right, success will be far from you. That's it.
We've come to the end of another SLS episode today. Our guest, Mr. Otome Oyo, the engineer who went into building strategic products and then moved on, pivoted to building people from a strategic perspective. It was such a lovely conversation. It's been a great day and a great time having Otome Oyo on this show. And do remember to subscribe to our YouTube page and also follow us on LinkedIn. Thank you and do have a great day.